UK's new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is inheriting an economy in recession. His rise to 10 Downing Street follows the exit of his two predecessors, Truss and Boris Johnson. With vast interests in Africa, UK will be looking to double up trade numbers and grow high investments into the continent, despite the economy facing unprecedented circumstances. We are now joined by Reginald Kadzutu, the CEO of Amana Capital, who is in London, to wrap our heads around what will define UK's trade interests in East Africa. Many thanks for joining us, Reginald, and a lot of buzz from London. This week, we did see a number of African leaders sending congratulatory messages to the new Prime Minister, that is Rishi Sunak. Perhaps, what is in store for Africa? What will be taking up his diary as he looks to one of the largest continents when it comes to market size?
Thank you. I think Africa should not be that hopeful with Rishi in power now. If you look at the Tories' agenda because it's going to implement the Tories' agenda, it's not going to implement any other agenda. Africa has not been on top of their goal, or on top of the political agenda in London for quite some time now, especially after Brexit. The UK government, or the UK Prime Minister, or the Tory government, have been more inward looking, and he is coming in at a time where, as you've mentioned, the economy is not doing well. There's a lot of geopolitical problems in the region with the Russia-Ukraine war, and he will really be focusing on that and trying to reestablish Britain's position in terms of being a global power. So if you look, one of the things that the Tories did was to dismantle DFID, Department for International Development, which was separate, and they collapsed it into the Foreign and Commonwealth Development, something which is under government. And Truss was the minister for that, or the secretary for that, before she became Prime Minister. And if you notice all the trips she did, she never actually made a trip to Africa as the minister in the Foreign and Commonwealth Development. Rishi himself he's strong on trade, but not that strong on aid when he was Chancellor. So I do not think Africa will see any major shift from the current development paths that we've already seen from the British government.
Quite some interesting sentiments there, Reginald, and I'd like to pick your thoughts, especially looking at the trade numbers. Right now, we're looking at close to $46 billion when you look at trade between Africa and the United Kingdom. When you look at the numbers, China and Africa, the numbers are nearly 4 times the size, standing at about $206 billion. Where does this leave a leader who is looking towards deepening trade in light of Brexit? Of course, they did lose some key strategic advantages.
One thing he's going to do, if you hear his talk when he was Chancellor, is that definitely Brexit is here to stay. He's not going to reverse that. He's going to even bargain harder to make sure Britain has a favorable position in Europe. He's not really going to look at trying to replace Europe with Africa. He himself is so anti-China, and most of his sentiments, even when he was Chancellor and even when he was trying to become Prime Minister against Truss, you'll find his sentiments a bit stronger against China, and trying to make sure to reduce China's dominance. But unfortunately, I don't think that would favor Africa, so to speak. I think the most that we will see is a continuation of trying to sign bilateral agreements, as now that they're no longer covered under the EU, bilateral agreements with Britain. He's also a bit stronger on immigration, especially illegal immigration, and one of his agendas is to make sure if a person is in the UK illegally, there is no route for them to actually then end up being there legally. So if you overstay, there'll be no route for you to be legally. And he has made it clear that you'll expect countries, especially African countries, to cooperate with him on that in terms of repatriating illegal migrants. He's not going to change the Rwanda idea or solution that they have where illegal migrants are processed in Rwanda. So that is not going to change. So even on the immigration side, it doesn't look that good for many Africans who normally come, overstay, then try to look for a legal route to stay. He's changing the rules for asylum, making them stricter and defining them stronger. So truth be said, as long as it's a Tory government with Rishi there, Africa should just continue looking east for any trade or any increase in their exports to China. We have a deficit with China because we import more than we export to them. And as African leaders, they should now look more of how do we bridge that trade deficit between us and China, and continue with whatever little that we have going to the UK. We will see definitely maybe further cuts to development aid from the British government as they try to make sure that every tax pound gets value for the British citizens. So I think aid will be more linked to where the British citizens are going to benefit from that aid, and it's not going to be free aid anymore.
All right, Reginald, it can't be all gloom and doom in Rishi reign. I'd like to look at how the markets behaved, and indeed, we did see the sterling pound was up by 1.77% against the dollar at 1.14, and this was 0.79 higher against the euro at 1.15. This technically signals that the markets, he was able to calm the markets after a rally that had happened previously.
Yes, definitely. He has a calming. He was a chancellor before. He was a chancellor during Boris Johnson's time, and being a chancellor, he had been campaigning to be prime minister on a more reasonable economic platform than Lars was, and Lars did reverse some of the tax cuts they were proposing, the unfunded tax cuts that they were proposing. He has a more sober economic plan or recovery plan going forward. Did the markets respond to him, or the markets responded to the not so good third quarter numbers from the US? I think the market responded more to that than to him being the prime minister. But he does have an economic calming effect, and we hope he'll be able to last more than 45 days. And clearly he's not about to call a general election, because if he does call a general election, the Tory party will lose. They are not in a good position currently in the country. So the best thing that he has is if he's actually able to implement part of the agenda of the Tories, that will be favorable. Then when the next general elections do come, they might have a chance of retaining power in Britain. But if not, he's just going to finish off this term, and the Conservatives most probably will come back into power.
Well, Reginald, clearly the Rishi effect has a tangible bearing on the pound. But let's look at really the big picture right now. Of course, he cannot ignore Africa in light of the export market, because we service a substantial amount of the UK market here in Africa, from the fresh produce to tea to cut flowers. This is an area that probably could take, I'd like to take your view on the same.
Abi, what other alternative does Africa have? We don't trade with ourselves. So whether he ignores us or not, we will still export to them. We will still export to Netherlands, and it will still end up in the UK. If we were a major trading partner for them, you will see the volumes of trade that comes either also from them to us, which is also very little compared to their total trade with the other regions, with Europe, with the North Atlantic area, with Asia, and even with China itself. So again, I think Africa needs to come to the realization, if we don't start trading with ourselves, they will continue buying our cut flowers, our tea, our coffee, but those are not things that will grind the UK economy to a halt. They can always get tea from somewhere else. We're not the only ones who produce tea. We're not the only ones who produce fruits. Go into the markets, go into your Sainsbury's, go into your Tesco's. You have fruits from Spain, avocados from Colombia. You have things from Brazil, Thailand, and all that. So Africa needs to wake up to the fact that if Africa does not start trading by itself,
many thanks.
then truth be said, we will have, there's nothing much that will come.